Hey Craig.
Hey Simon,
So what do you have for me today?
I have the pretty much the latest kind of obsessive reading hole that I fell down. It has to do with, well, a couple things. So it's a journey that goes through the history of color and also the Parthenon and jello, and eventually into Target and Marie Kondo.
Okay.
um, which it will absolutely make sense by the time I'm done, I promise.
All right, let's go through each of those. So the history of color.
Yes.
Um
Well,
yeah,
part of the history of color, not all color. That's way too broad.
yeah, okay. So I know nothing about the history of color. What was the next thing?
Um, the Parthenon.
Parthenon, that sounds like either Greek or Roman.
Yeah, great.
Greek. Okay. Well, I've never been to Greece, so I'm okay not knowing that.
Yeah,
What was it? What was after that?
Jello.
Jello. I know what's his name? Bill Cosby. Or is
Yeah,
that pudding?
that's pudding, but I think it was
Okay.
Jello pudding. So you actually, yeah, it's not too far off, I guess.
Okay, so you're gonna go deep on Bill Cosby,
Yes.
and then what was the next thing?
Um,
I know
Marie
Marie
Kondo.
Marie
Yeah,
Kondo. So she wrote a famous book or something like that about the not like kind of like getting rid of things that don't bring you joy.
yeah,
But I think I read recently she's now like had kids and now she just like is a borderline hoarder or something and is like completely given up on that philosophy or something like
yeah.
that.
I mean, I just kind of picked her, as sort of a representative of that whole like the trend of minimalism, right? We're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna get rid of all of our shit and like free ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And any other items on there?
Briefly, Target.
Target, the
Yeah,
store.
yeah.
Okay, I go to that store once a week, so I'm
Okay,
I'm very familiar.
good. Yeah.
Uh, okay, so cool. I'm ready to go down this rabbit hole. Before we do, what's the name of this show we're on right now?
The name of the show that we're on right now is Momentary Experts.
Yes,
Um,
and you can get it wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and so even though we're not going to be doing this each week, I do have a PowerPoint prepared today. So I'm doing a screen share because it is at least partially a photographic journey that I'm taking you on here. So
Okay, you're way more prepared than I'm ever going to be for one of these.
here we go. So share from current slide. Okay, so one, color. And I guess I'll start by just kind of asking you a question, right? So when you picture in your head, if you were attempting to come up with the color palette of classiness, right? So think of like class and refinement and gala balls, right? And sort of the color palette of clothing and of interior decoration. What are the colors that kind of immediately come to mind as like the most readily associated with classiness,
Gold
refinement?
and gold and yellow, maybe.
Go- Golden yellow, really? You associate yellow with like class and refinement?
Like so you're talking about like clothes people would be wearing
Yeah,
if they were
yeah,
classy.
yeah.
I'm just completely drawing a blank. I don't know.
See, I guess what comes to mind to me is like a black tie event, right? So it's like,
Okay.
basically black and white,
I guess
right?
I was thinking more women than men. Yeah, if you were saying like what is a if you were saying men specifically, yeah, black and white.
Yeah. So the first part of this is color, and it's a small part of the history of color that has to do with yeah, class. Uh at one point literally like legally in regard to class, but what we associate with classy. So this is just a random painting here. I think this is like a presentation of maybe Victoria, right? At a European aristocratic event, right? So you've got
Yeah,
lots of
so what I'm looking at is a vaguely impressionist because we gotta describe what we're looking at because this will
right.
also be biased from this is kind of like a it seems like almost like an impressionist painting in like maybe 17 or 1800s
Yeah,
England or something like that. And
yeah,
there's
mid
a
1800s continental Europe, so lots of
yeah,
white frilly dresses,
yeah. And the
white
men
marble.
and the men look like they're in some kind of military formal uniform or something like that.
Yeah, which I think was super common when, yeah, if you were like a prince, you were automatically a general in an army. Um, But yeah, just and with a great many sort of like very fancy medals just automatically awarded to you. But yeah, so but I mean, broadly the color palette is, you know, white or at least light colors, right? So like white frilly dresses, marble, everything very clean, right? And then yeah, if you look at original or official royal portraits. So here's Queen Elizabeth II, recently departed. But so these are her kind of two earliest official portraits, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess, yeah, what we're looking at here, the one on the left, she's sort of very regal, standing up behind a chair. She has a blue sash and a white, maybe silk kind of dress on,
Mhm.
white diamonds in her tiara, and then the one on the right is there's some gold embroidery, looks like a white sable or an ermine sort
Well,
of
she just
trim,
looks
right?
like she just looks like a king in the second one. Like she looks like she's in king's clothing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but as far as the color palette, yeah, it's white. There's some sable trim, some gold thread, right? And then, you know, she's holding jewels and she's wearing the crown jewels and she's holding the gold scepter, right? Um, but you know, sort of very classy, very refined, very reserved. I guess what you would associate with the British monarchy. And even on into, you know, when she was old, her official portrait, you know, white um, lace dress, white gloves, still got the crown. And then on the right is actually the first official portrait of Camilla Parker Bowles, wife of now of formerly Prince Charles. Is
He's
he King
King.
Charles now,
Yeah,
or
he's
have they
King.
changed the name?
He's King. I think he's just King Charles. Yeah, that's how.
Okay,
They just announced he had cancer today. So and they
yeah,
were calling
okay,
him King Charles. Yeah.
okay, yeah. It's King Charles. This is Camilla Parker Bowles. Still, so yeah, it's a kind of white dress with some fancy embroidery, right? But you know, still very reserved, very kind of quiet, elegant dress,
Mhm.
right? But then if you go back to Elizabeth the One, right, the Virgin Queen, and in her portraits,
Why is she called the
it's
Virgin Queen?
I don't know. It was
it's it's just literally she never got married and was
no, she
never had a
totally
kid.
did. She totally did.
Okay.
She had kids and shit. I don't know why they called her the Virgin Queen.
Okay.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, yeah. So like her a lot more color, right? So this the one on the left is kind of pre-ascension to the throne, right is post-ascension. This is like 1550 to like 1575 that we're looking at here, right? And so
Yeah.
it's just a lot more color, right? It's brighter, it's more vibrant. There's a lot, it's a lot busier. It's an exercise in maximalism. The same here, particularly that image on the right with like the black silk brocade and then like purple accents and lots of gold and a literal either a sable or an ermine. I think they're both little fuzzy creatures on her sleeve. And then on the left is yeah, sort of the red um um what's the really fancy type of fabric?
Silk.
Silk. No, the fuzzier one.
Oh, I don't know.
Velvet,
But
right?
yeah.
Yeah, but again, very colorful, right? Like bright and colorful and audacious and maximalist, and there's just a lot going on. You
Yeah.
compare it to like the present, sort of much more reserved style of looking at a monarch. So what
Yeah,
changed?
so in the original photos you showed of Queen Elizabeth, she was basically just wearing like really boring white outfits.
Yeah,
And these are like almost like clown clothes. They're so like colorful and poofy and everything like that.
just yeah, super maximalist. So what changed? Well, this is a scan of a sumptuary law. So in medieval England and then up into the Renaissance, right? Color was so closely tied with class that it was actually illegal to own certain colors. You can see at the top here the color of, and it's spelled Purpure, particularly purple. Purple
Mhm.
also meant dark blues, kind of that whole end of the spectrum. If you were not part of the aristocracy, it was illegal to even own the color.
Wow. Okay.
You couldn't have an article of clothing that was dyed that. I don't know what happened if you found some. Maybe you got to turn it into like the authorities, right? But there was like the colors that you could wear were associated with class, particularly royal purple. Purple was restricted to those of very high social rank, right? So,
Why?
well, I'll get to that in a second. So here's actually the text of one of the sumptuary laws. This is the one that Elizabeth the One sort of reinforced, right? So it was I'll just read it. None shall wear in his apparel any silk of the color of purple, cloth of gold tissued, nor fur of sables, but only the king, queen, queen's mother, children, brethren, sisters, uncles, and aunts, and except dukes, marquises, and earls, who may wear the same in doublets, jerkins, linings of cloaks, gowns, and hose, and those of the garter, purple in mantles only. Enforcing statutes of apparel, 15 June 1574, right?
And
So,
this is in what country?
England,
Okay,
yeah.
so in the 1500s, late
Mhm.
1500s, purple is not allowed in England
Yeah,
unless you are of the royalty.
yeah.
Okay.
And then, any of that long list of people I just read, they could do it, right?
Mhm.
The gold tissues, gold embroidery, purple, that kind of, and again, when they said purple, they also meant like very dark blues, things like that. Um, and then also, yeah, so certain furs. So it says sable. So I think that was actually a sable that was like painted just like hanging out on her arm. Because when you're the Queen of England, you're so fancy, you don't even need the fur. They just come and like live on your arm.
What's a
Um,
sable?
it's like a very furry. It looks like a otter, I think, like a white otter, right? But like very soft fur. It's like a very fancy fur back when people were really into like fancy fur.
Okay.
So yeah. So yeah, again, here we have. So that's a sable, I think, on her arm.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like
Like
a little ferret or something.
yeah, like literally, yeah, a ferret. Sorry, not an otter, ferret. Yeah, and you can see, yeah. So she's wearing like black velvet. With there are purple kind of embroidery on it, lots of sort of like gold embroidery on the dress itself, the lace. It's just it's all ridiculously maximalist, right? Sort of all these
Mhm.
things that are specifically outlined as you cannot wear these if you're poor. And it was, I mean, like jail time, right? Like you could go to jail if you were caught. Like I'm picturing, like people like in an alley, like, hey, come over here, and then like they pull their coat open, and then they got some just like purple shit, and
Yeah.
like, yeah, you want some purple stuff? It's fancy, right?
And
And
uh,
like,
and maybe this is completely off track, but like, isn't like, don't you always hear the saying that blue isn't naturally occurring in nature or something like that? Does this have anything to do with that, or is this like not even
well,
close?
kind of, yeah. So rare, so blue is a rarer color in nature. I think it might be the rarest of like the primary colors. It You just don't see a lot of blue things, right? Like
Yeah.
blue jays and some blue flowers and some sea life, which we'll get to in a second. But it doesn't happen very often. And actually, the value in it came not just from its rarity, but just how hard it was to make synthetically, right? So
Mhm.
if you've seen, and I don't have any pictures of it here, but if you've seen kind of any medieval sort of like illuminated manuscript, like the illuminated copies of the Bible, and there's this like very dark blue that's still super vibrant. That's because that was made with crushed lapis, which is mined mostly in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
And consistently throughout the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance, lapis was about the exact same price as gold. Like an ounce of lapis was the same as an ounce of gold because it was so precious, right? And they would have considered that color part of this whole purple end of the spectrum, right? If you're thinking about like Roy G. Biv, like blue, indigo, violet, right? So these sort of dark colors are reserved. And in particular, purple here. So they called it Tyrian purple because named after a type of sea snail. So we don't see the snails there, we just see the shells. So this is a museum display of different kinds of like purples and reds and like a mauve next to some seashells. And so Tyrian purple actually named after Tyre in Lebanon. But it was made from sea snails, a particular kind of Mediterranean sea snail. And
Wait, so the purple that was worn by the royalty was made from a sea snail.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
And you had to go out on a boat, and you had to get the sea snails, and one sea snail did not make a lot of this. So it was
So
super expensive.
you just had to like mash them up and make like a dye out of them.
Yeah, I don't know the exact process, but basically that, yeah, they secreted some sort of a liquid that when they were sort of mashed up and distilled made purple dye,
Mhm.
right? And so the vast majority of purple came from, like in Europe anyway, in the Middle Ages, from this sea snail, right? It was called Tyrian purple, royal purple. It also came from indigo. So indigo and India have the same root word, um, named from kind of a European perspective, but it's a plant that grew in India, right? So the only other
Which
way,
was, but at that point, India wasn't a colony of the UK, right?
no, at this point we're now talking about like when the indigo trade really started, would have, so like in the 1500s really, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're through these like intermediary merchants, but again, so your options are go catch a whole shitload of snails that are under the ocean and
hmm,
mash them all up,
yeah,
or find somebody from India who's trading in this indigo kind of dye.
yeah,
So here is a sort of a period block of indigo dye.
hmm,
This is in, I think, a museum in Germany, right? But that's what you would have bought, right? And it's more blue than purple, but it was all kind of in that same color end that was reserved and also very expensive, right? So those are really your options, right? You can get crushed lapis for books, which you got to mine in Afghanistan, or you got to get indigo from India, or you got to smush up a bunch of sea snail. It's hard to get. It is a hard dye to make, so it's very expensive. And as because it was, I guess, so rare and so expensive, it was reserved for royalty. It was, according to the sumptuary laws, again, if you were not one of that list of dukes and marquises and aunts and uncles of the queen, and you were not legally allowed to own it, and you would go to jail.
hmm.
People did go to jail for illegal trafficking in colors, right? Um, to a great extent, the colonization of the Caribbean was driven by this desire for indigo. So here we have an engraving of an early indigo plantation. So the majority of the plantations in, I think, Haiti and Jamaica, Haiti being the French and then
Yeah.
Jamaica being the British, were indigo plantations. So here we have a, a 16th century engraving of slaves who are being forced to work an indigo plantation.
So the
Uh,
the thinking was that like India is very far away.
mhm.
Um, and the climate in Jamaica and Haiti are kind of similar to India, so let's just grow this here.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
And so in the middle here we have the indigo tree, right? So you can kind of see the flowers there. This is just
mhm.
like a representation of it. They're being, yeah, so it's there are steps here, so throwing the indigo into the water, stirring it, cutting it, carrying it to dry, so they could get their own access to this color palette, so that they could circumvent, having to go all the way to India. And it was cheaper, but as opposing to have to buy very expensive indigo, they could just make it with slaves, right? And
Yeah.
which is what they did. Um, all of this changed in 1856. So what you're looking at here is the original batch of what he called mauveline. Sir William Perkin, who was trying to come up with a way to, I think, synthetically create quinine, which is useful for like malaria.
Mhm.
And he failed at that, but he noticed that the soot that he was wiping out of a bottle after a failed attempt to create this had a purplish tint to it. And
So my guess is he accidentally created a synthetic purple, thereby making purple less rare.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
He accidentally created this and he called it mauveline, right? And so, yeah, all of a sudden, and so here you see a period kind of piece of silk and some rope that was dyed with it. And all of a sudden, overnight, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and thanks to chemistry and science, purple is no longer this rare, incredibly expensive sort of luxury item that you've either got to get from working slaves to death on a plantation in the Caribbean or harvesting a bunch of sea snails or buying it from India. All of a sudden, it's available to everyone. And similarly, overnight almost, then you get this change in, eventually the sumptuary laws, which were actually repealed in the 1700s, but then you that's when you get aristocracy who start to dress, more in white and wearing white gloves and white frilly dresses and white dress shirts, because if you couldn't prove that you were wealthy by having a lot of color, at least you could prove that you were wealthy by wearing white and proving that you didn't have to do manual labor.
That there was no soot.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Um, so,
And
and
it's kind
there's,
of like, I mean, I remember like learning as a kid about one indication that you're or two separate things. One indication that you were rich was having uncut fingernails, so that you would see these photos of these like long,
mm,
spindly fingernails, and that was a indication that. And I don't know if this is apocryphal or what, but this was something we learned when we were kids. And then also, if you were, overweight or fat, that was an indication that
yeah,
you
yeah.
were so wealthy that you could afford to eat to excess or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, there are yeah, I remember seeing it was like a series of portraits of, I think they were like Italian nobility in the Middle Ages, and they're all just fat as shit.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, because it was like you wanted to immortalize how fat you were. So you would have a portrait painter come in, and then you're just like, get my worst side.
Yeah.
I
So
want the
whereas,
chins, I want the one,
yeah.
oh my God. Everyone's got to know how fat I am.
Well,
Yeah.
whereas like Vogue today will touch up models' photos to remove cellulite and any like
Mhm.
blemishes or anything like that. That was the original Photoshop, but they would make them look worse.
Yeah, yeah. They're like, I look kind of too thin there. And they're like, that's what you look like. And they're like, can you make me fatter? I'm
Yeah.
paying you here. I'm paying you good money. Come on,
Yeah. Yeah.
help me out
Okay.
here.
Okay.
Um,
So this is how the like everything this the signal of wealth was being able to have like pure white clothes.
yeah, yeah, because I mean, especially in like the 1900s, when it was pretty much impossible to, I mean, like any kind of like manual labor, you're gonna get dirty, right? And so, and particularly sort of the growth in fashion then of sort of long white um cloth gloves that both men and women would wear, because again that proved that you didn't have to do manual labor, right? Because your clothes aren't dirty. So it was pretty much, yeah, so because this isn't expensive anymore, and because anyone can have this kind of color, they needed a new way to show that they were wealthy. And so now the kind of the classy color palette all of a sudden shifted. um, and along with it, you get this move away, I think, from this sort of like maximalist kind of style of dress, into sort of, I guess, what we think of as kind of more refined and reserved now. Because at the same time, you're wanting to show off the fact that you don't have to do manual labor, and that you can afford people, to hire people to wash the hell out of your clothes, and to bleach them, and to get them super white, right? Because that's another display of wealth. And it all happens around the same time. You get, suddenly color is cheap, and so because it's not expensive, it's not classy. And because it's not classy anymore, they need to find something else which is not classy, which is, yes, you could black tie affairs and white shirts and white gloves and big frilly white dresses, and just basically showing that they didn't have to do any labor on the day that they went to the ball, and they could afford to have it laundered.
Makes sense.
So continuing with color, though, because there's another kind of interesting bit to the story. So this is the Parthenon, as I
Mhm.
had kind of mentioned earlier. So when you think of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, I guess, you think of this, right? Kind of white columns and white marble, right? And just these sort of,
I think I know where you're going with this. Okay, keep on going.
yeah. Um, which is how we've thought of it for years and for
Yeah.
forever, really,
Mhm.
right? The White City on the Hill, the Chicago World's Fair Exposition, the White City, right? And
Mhm.
even now when people are sort of like evoking ancient Greece with marble columns and shit, it's white and it's glistening and it's clean. That's, of course, we know, not what the Parthenon originally looked like. So this is the Parthenon now. Here is a recreation of the Parthenon as it looked
Yeah.
then. The
And
Greeks, it turns out, loved color.
yeah, and for the listeners at home, the original Parthenon he was showing was like what you would think of when you're visiting Rome or Greece today. These like white columns. It looks like now it's black columns and then super colorful imagery, up top with paintings and everything like that of greens, blues, yellows, and reds and stuff like that.
Well, I think the black is really just a function of the fact that this particular picture is at night. So this is actually hilariously in Nashville, where they have recreated
Yeah,
the
I've been there.
Parthenon.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think it's just because it's lit from the bottom. But
Okay.
yeah, it's you've got these sort of bright, vibrant colors and a lot of blue because it would have been just as hard for them to make blue as it was later for the people in Renaissance England enacting the sumptuary laws. So very vibrant and bright and colorful. Now, particularly pay attention to the figures up on top of the Parthenon, which you'll see are not there.
Mhm.
So where are they? Do you know where they are?
You're saying the figures go back to the other one? So you're
Yeah.
does that thing literally at the very top, or the
Well,
paint? It looks like a gargoyle or something like that. I
no,
don't know.
like all the people. There's a lot of
Oh
people.
yeah, yeah, the people. Okay, so the paintings of the people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Like,
you're asking where are they now?
yeah. Do you know where they are?
I mean, I'm guessing they were just washed off, but maybe they were
Well, they
stolen.
weren't paintings, they were statues.
Okay, they were
And
statues.
depending on who you talk to, they were stolen or they were not stolen because right now, those which are referred to as the Elgin marbles. So in the early-ish 1800s, I think like 1820, maybe 1817, something like that. This British guy, Lord Elgin, travels to Greece, which is, of course, under Ottoman control. They're a province of the Ottoman.
Hmm.
And then he basically pays some money to some local officials to allow him to take the statues off of the Parthenon,
And at
ship
this
them
point,
back
it's
to
just
England.
like, it's just some like degraded, like old relic that nobody's taking care of or anything like that.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the line is that sort of like it was just out there decaying. I mean, the rest of it's pretty okay, right?
Yeah,
And the like all the statues that you see would still be there. They just wouldn't be
yeah.
vibrantly colored, which they aren't now.
Yeah.
Um,
And I found it like when I went to Rome, I found it amazing. I think there was like some like incredibly long period of time where Rome was just abandoned. So you had this like majestic
yeah,
city that was just sitting there kind of just untouched by like
yeah.
generations of people, except,
Was that like yeah, after like the last sack of Rome, it was like the aqueduct was destroyed, right? And so within 100 years, Rome went from being like a million people to like less than 5,000 or something like that.
yeah, and just
Yeah,
basically an uninhabited like shithole basically.
yeah, which would be wild to have like walked around there, right? And you still got sort of because I mean it's stone and stone
Yeah.
sticks around for a while,
Yeah.
right? But then like not a lot of people. So here's a selection of the Elgin marbles. Now Greece wants the Elgin marbles back. Greece's
Hmm.
position is he may have bought them from some local Ottoman authorities, but they weren't Greek. We are now independent. Please give us back the Elgin marbles so we can
Where
display them.
where are they now? Like somewhere in London or something?
Yeah, they're in the British Museum. They're
Hmm.
in the British Museum. And the British Museum's official stance is that they're the only ones who can take care of them. That's
Yeah.
that's that's the official stance.
Yeah. And I've heard
A
this
couple,
before. That's like
yeah,
their official stance on a lot of stuff.
yeah. A couple of times, officials like in the British government and with the British Museum have accidentally gone off script and said, "Yeah, it would just set a bad precedent. If we give these back, we have to give everything back, and then we have nothing to put in our museum,
Yeah.
and we don't have an empire anymore. So this is our only way to still have one, right?"
Yeah.
So here we have the Elgin marbles, but their statement that we're the only one who can take care of them is super ironic because in the 1930s the British Museum basically bleached these. So you see how they look here. Now,
Yeah.
they weren't that colorful, but they actually did still have pigment on them. They
Mhm.
still had some color on them. And then in the 1930s, the British Museum was getting ready for a big exposition where they were going to show off their Elgin marbles, right? And hilariously, by the way, in the sort of National Museum of Greece in Athens, there's an entire room that's the Elgin Marbles room, and it's just empty.
Nice. It's just
Yeah,
waiting for it to be
yeah,
returned.
yeah. They have all of the little like placards and stuff, like you see below the statues here, but it's just empty. Anyway, um, and when they were getting ready to do it, they scrubbed them completely clean. Basically bleached the fucking things, got all the color, all the pigment off of them. Now their official stance is that these were just some overzealous just super nitpicky, like anal retentive workmen who scrubbed the hell out of them, which isn't really much better because, like, how long would that take? And nobody noticed what they were doing. Some people think that no, they just decided that they should be white because by the 1930s, in either case, if these were some overzealous sort of workmen who just scrubbed the shit out of them for weeks and nobody noticed, or if it was done under the direction of the British Museum, not something that they would want to admit now because it sort of undermines their official position that they're the only ones who can take care of this. You have in both cases the fact that by the 1930s it was already so internalized, this association of white
Yeah.
with class and refinement, that when they saw pigment on it, they just assumed it had to be wrong somehow. This was either graffiti or they accidentally got painted, who knows? In any case, they need to be white. And this happened frequently. They would get in these statues, they would get in these marbles, and then they would just scrub the hell out of them until they were glistening and pristine and white. And it's, even though we now know that they were painted and vibrantly painted, I mean, in my own brain,
Yeah.
when I tell my brain to, okay, show me ancient Greece, I still think of white columns and white marble. It's so ingrained in how we think of it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's shocking whenever you see a recreation of a
yeah.
statue and it's original because it looks almost cartoonish and bad. Like it
Mhm.
actually, to your eye, it looks more classy, just completely white than what it actually was when it was probably very cartoonish and maybe even what we would consider ugly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and when you say classy, exactly, right? It's classier to us to have be devoid of color
Yeah.
rather than, and they probably weren't as garish as that. What we're seeing is the results of these sort of like spectrometers. Yes, I don't know what the word for doing a thing with that is, but basically it's like they probably weren't block colors. In painting terms, those are the base coats, right? And then they would have then sort of painted it much more finely. So he wouldn't have just been like block green, block blue, block red, right?
Mhm.
Um, those are the base coats. But still, even so, when you do see ones that are sort of painted, and the assumption is they probably tried to make them look like real people, it looks wrong.
Mhm.
And we can't make ourselves think that it looks right. And, so part of this is because in the 1800s also was when you get the independence of Greece, you get this idealization of ancient Greece as this sort of perfect example of culture and refinement, a perfect society from which we have since degraded. It's why you get the idea that you can't end a sentence in a preposition. Like you've
Why is
heard that
that?
grammar rule,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, totally.
Like you can't say, where did you come from? You have to say, from
Where
where
did you
did
come?
you come? Yeah, exactly. I don't have anything to write with. I don't have anything with which to write. Do you know why we have that rule? It's so
Why?
dumb. Because in Latin, it is impossible to end a sentence with a preposition.
I see.
So the assumption was that among grammarians, that because it was impossible to do it with Latin, that you at least shouldn't do it with English, even though it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
all
So
those grammatical rules that some people still insist are true, they're like these like weird 100-year-old or more
yeah,
older, like super old things that really like make no sense in contemporary lifestyle and only grammar prescriptivists like really kind of
yeah.
still stick with it.
If you ask somebody where did you come from,
Yeah.
like it's perfectly clear what I am asking. I don't need to. But yeah, it was this attempt to apply the grammar rules of a dead language
Hmm.
to a completely unrelated language, right? So there was
Yeah.
this idealization in the 1800s, especially of Greece and Rome, but particularly ancient Greece, as this sort of idealized sort of society from which we have now degraded. And so yeah, but so it should have been white. It should have been refined and classy. So they just scrubbed them clean. And now we only know what color they were because actually doing sort of like this particular type of X-ray that can see traces of pigment, we can kind of see what the colors were. Um, so from uh, this fact that it was really hard to get purple because you had to get it from sea snails to a switch into the association of at least white with being sort of refined and classy. That's where then in the 1930s, you get the British Museum bleaching the Elgin marbles to make them look more like they then assumed they should have looked, because that was how they conceived of ancient Greece, right? So there's this kind of trail that you follow through it.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense.
So, part two, Jello.
Jello. I've never seen white Jello. I feel like I've seen clear Jello, but I guess maybe that would count as white Jello, but I don't know that white Jello exists.
I don't know that. I mean, I guess you could. I mean, there's like
Maybe I'm just thinking of
milky.
gelatin, milky gelatin, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, well, there's panna cotta's usually white
yeah.
anyway. But this isn't about colorful Jello. This is just about Jello.
Okay.
So before we started talking about this, if you were to think of like fine dining cuisine,
Hmm.
and I had asked you to come up with a list of like fine dining cuisine options, would you have included Jello in that list?
No.
No. In the 1800s, the precursor to Jello was called aspic, which is something that is made from like horse hooves, right? And it was like
Yeah.
super expensive. It was really hard to make.
And isn't Jello has gelatin in it, right? So
Yeah,
that's why vegetarians don't eat it, is because it has
yeah,
some kind of horse hooves or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. But Jello is much cheaper to make, right? So
Mhm.
it was this process of like powdered gelatin. 1897, I believe it was the invention. Um, and that's where you get, yes, a Jello mold, right? And
Mhm.
so this doesn't look particularly like haute couture. Um, but in the 1800s, prior to the invention of powdered gelatin, you had to make it with aspic, and aspic is much harder to make. It's much more labor intensive, and so it was much more valuable. So this is a painting of and I don't have it in my, where's the notes here? Because I have his name here. I don't know how to see the notes. Um, I think his name is Jules Hardin, maybe.
Okay.
The painting, he was the head chef at the San Francisco Palace Hotel, and this painting is from 1874. And to describe it to people listening, you've got a chef with some fantastic mutton chops and a chef's hat, and he's holding a platter with some boiled eggs and then a jello mold, and then there's a lobster on top of the jello mold, and it's impaled with a little sword, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the
So the
lobster is impaled to the gelatin.
yeah,
I
and
wouldn't even be able to, if you hadn't told me that was gelatin, I wouldn't know that it was gelatin.
yeah, but you can kind of see now it's like there's sort of things suspended in it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a jello mold that they put food into, which if you've ever seen a 1950s cookbook, they're all jello molds, and
Yeah.
we'll get to that in a second as to why that is. But yeah, so this is the head chef at a very prestigious hotel restaurant in 1874, and this is his portrait. This is his official oil painting, and he has to show off to anyone viewing it in a way that he is certain will be forever immediately understood that he is only dealing with fine dining, and he picks a jello mold,
Okay.
right? And if
And
you
that's
look at,
because, and the reason this was such a delicacy is because it was hard to make.
really hard to make, really expensive. The there were all sorts of aspic dishes which were regularly a staple of European royal courts. One dish whose name I can't remember, right, but it's like aspic dish with things like suspended, and it was like the official dish of like I think the Austrian court, right? And then you get sort of like if there are like menus of like feasts at like the Russian court, the czars, right? And it's aspic, right? So
Mhm.
like you go to fine dining menus in New York in the 1880s, right? It's aspic, right? Sort of like it's this mark of luxury, right? And people sort of, yeah, I'm presumingly or presumably, eating their aspic and talking about the fine notes of flavor in it, and just super fancy. But then 1897, this guy invents powdered gelatin, and all of a sudden Jello is very, very cheap. It is no longer difficult to make. It's so much easier to make than aspic, right?
Mhm.
And but still for a long time. So this painting here is an official Jello advertisement. from the I'm guessing 1910s, 1920s, right? But
Mhm.
they're still evoking in this official advertisement for Jello this idea of luxury at home. So here you have a normal family around a table, right? They're dressed up nicely, but they're around like a dinner table, probably for their like formal Sunday meal, but they have a butler, and the butler is bringing them a Jello mold,
Yeah.
right? The luxury and indulgence of something like Jello is now accessible to the masses, right?
Uh,
Like imagine having this same aesthetic applied to like a Jello advertisement now. Like
yeah.
people would
Totally.
assume you were joking. They would assume it was a send up, right? They were dead serious here. That's what they're trying to evoke in this early Jello advertisement is this idea that, for the average person who knew of aspic and who knew of all these aspic dishes, had never tried it for as long as they had been alive.
Yeah.
It
And
was the
so
domain of the wealthy.
and
Now
and so
you
the
can eat
Jello,
Jello.
the Jello was so well branded at that point that its brand continued to endure for at least a little while, despite the fact that it was incredibly easy to obtain it now.
Yeah, yeah. You too can experience the indulgent sort of luxury of this, right?
Yeah.
And this continued for a while. That's why. So this is an image from like a 1950s cookbook.
Oh, this is gross. So this is shrimp, cocktail shrimp, suspended in green gelatin,
Yeah,
and there's something in the middle, I guess some kind of dip that you're supposed to
looks like
eat.
apples maybe.
Yes, maybe some kind of like
Um,
apple slaw with some celery.
there's a few articles online. It's become like super popular to like go through like a 1950s cookbook and try to
Yeah.
make these horrors
I think there are
that
like entire like super popular TikTok accounts where they go
yeah,
and like cook these
yeah,
things.
right. And but it
Yeah.
was still sort of you're seeing kind of the tail end of the fact that for centuries, I don't know how far back aspect goes. There was this food that was the domain of the wealthy, but now you're throwing dinner parties at your house, and where you can give your guests the luxury of the Jello mold, right?
Yeah.
And it's a conversation piece. It's a
Yeah.
it's, it's a showstopper.
And I knew Jello molds were things in the 50s, but I didn't know
Mm.
that's where it really stemmed from.
Yeah, like it's a conversation starter. Like you and your guests would sit around and talk about the fact that you had suspended shrimp in Jello,
Yeah.
in green Jello. Yeah, it's something that we laugh about today, but again, in this advertisement, this is even in the 1950s, they're still trying to evoke this idea of Jello as sort of being, this impressive thing that you can make, that you can use as a centerpiece for your cocktail party that you hold, right?
Mhm.
And so again, just like color, you get something that is classy because it is expensive. Suddenly, thanks to industrialization, somebody is able to come up with a cheaper alternative, and now it's no longer classic.
And now the
Now
only
Jello is just Jello.
Jello that people eat is Jello shots.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So again, coincidentally, the thing that was refined and classy. So it's going back to this idea of, if you were asked to, okay, how do you define classy? Like, what does classy mean? Right. And I was trying to think about this myself in my head, and I was like, just coming up with synonyms for classy, like refined, elegant, right?
Mhm.
Not trashy. Do we just define classy as the opposite of whatever trashy is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then do we just define trashy as whatever the opposite of classy is? And it kind of occurred to me that like I couldn't think of a really good definition because it's so consistently shifting, but it is interesting that consistently it is coincidentally what is also expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a part of culture, and it's a part of culture that is upstream or elite. So whatever is expensive at the time is not always by definition, because there are things that are expensive that are purposefully unclassy, but
Mhm.
the expense of it plays a part.
Yeah. Um, so that pretty much is Jello, right?
Okay,
And the story of Jello there.
that's the story of Jello.
Getting into part three, minimalism. So I was racking my brain and I was trying to come up with, okay, Do we have a present day example of something that is considered to be kind of a classy, elegant thing to do,
Yeah.
but also coincidentally is the domain of privilege and at least comparative wealth, right? And I kept coming back to minimalism, particularly Marie Kondo. So here we have Marie Kondo, who's sitting at her like reclaimed wood table. I tried to actually find the brand of the table. I don't know what it is. I guarantee you, I all but guarantee you, it's where she's sitting at like a $3,000 reclaimed wood table, which sparks joy,
Hmm.
oddly. And so I was thinking about who gets to be a minimalist, right? So there's this whole idea of minimalism, which is that we are weighed down by these things that we own, and it's clutter and it causes us stress. So Marie Kondo has this book, and it's get rid of things if they don't spark joy. You have a thing and this doesn't spark joy, throw it away. This doesn't spark joy, throw it away. But who gets to be a minimalist? So in order to do this kind of Marie Kondo, let's throw away everything that I own, there need to be a couple things in place. One, you need to be able to get the stuff again if you need to, right? Like once this craze passes over and you're okay, I'll actually want things again, I can buy them, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
That's not going to hurt me. Two, you need to have a pretty nice place. If you look at Marie Kondo's minimalist kind of living room here, with her like very nice reclaimed wood table and like the plants. And I mean, it wouldn't work if you. So this is an
Yeah.
image I took today off of Craigslist.
Yeah.
This is a cheap apartment currently for rent in Omaha. It's not a bad one, right? It's perfectly functional. And if you're a single person and you're looking for like the cheapest kind of one bedroom option where there's not roaches climbing out of the walls, this is a good one. I'm not
Yeah.
shitting on this apartment at all. But comparing this apartment, which is just a normal ass apartment, looks like the cupboards are probably from the 80s.
Yeah.
It's got linoleum flooring and some cheap carpet. With
Yeah.
this doesn't work if you want to be a minimalist. If you live in a not nice place without a recent coat of paint on the walls and without
Natural lighting, like
natural lighting and very nice furniture, which is just coincidentally minimalistic, but is also probably several $1,000s. If you're just sitting in this fucking apartment that we're looking at now with a card table and like a potted plant that you got from the lawn and garden section of Walmart,
you just look like you can't afford furniture.
it doesn't work. It doesn't work. But I think there are a lot of people who would associate this image with, yeah, just, she's a pretty classy lady. There's some refinement here.
Yeah. And
Minimalism and stripping away all of this stuff is kind of as maybe as close as a lot of kind of people are going to come to sort of these kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word here, classy endeavors. But they work when you call classy the a thing that denotes class.
also going
Going
back to your
back
original point
point.
of, sorry, I'm suddenly getting an echo, but going back to your original point of the white with the purity and everything like that,
Yeah,
most
yeah.
like, like she can afford because she can have really clean walls and stuff
Mhm.
like that. It's not like some old ass house that has like stains on the walls and stuff like that. That plays
Yeah,
into the part of the minimalism.
exactly. So, what if, as a definition of classy, we don't think of refinement and elegance, but we think of it as simply the things that denote somebody simply by possessing them or exhibiting them to be a member of a class.
Okay, that makes
So, if
sense.
you're looking at this, there's no way that this woman is poor.
No.
The house is way too nice. The
Yeah.
lighting's way too good. The furniture is way too nice. Even though she doesn't need any decorations on the walls, you know that this is not a shitty house. Not the case here.
Okay, I'm with you.
And so, if we keep going with that, another thing that occurred to me today, and I don't have an image of it because I don't need an image of Target, and I looked this up, the average salary of the people who shop at Target is about $20,000 higher than the average people who shop at Walmart. And I've shopped at both. 90% of what I would buy at Target is also what I would buy at Walmart. It's all of the daily things. It's toilet paper and the paper towels and the laundry detergent, right? Which are all more expensive at Target,
Hmm.
right? So what are you buying when you're paying $2 more for the bottle of Tide at Target? Are you buying better Tide? Is this upgraded Target sort of only Tide? No, it's the same shit. It's just more expensive because what you're buying is not better Tide laundry detergent. You're buying being able to shop in a place where there are less poor people.
Okay.
You know, if you were to ask 1,000 people what's classier, Target or Walmart, most people are just gonna say Target. And they do have like knickknacks and little fucking candles and house decorations and shit, right? And it's that's why bullshit Target Sundays are always fun because you just go look at stuff and just buy random things. But again, 90% of what people buy are the same at Target as
Hmm.
they are at Walmart. They're not better, they're just more expensive. And I think that might be the readiest at hand example that I can think of this direct association with, why are you buying your laundry detergent at Target and as opposed to Walmart? Unless, then a person could counter, yes, well, I have ethical problems with Walmart and what they're doing. Okay, fine. And I guess as far as mega corporations and sort of like giant global scale capitalism goes, maybe Target is marginally better than Walmart, right? But
Yeah.
I would argue that mostly what people are buying when they go to Target is just to be around people who are the kind of people who can afford to shop at Target.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the comparative prices of Target and Walmart and whether there is like whether it's true that Tide is more expensive at Target. I do know that Target, just based on conversations, is like with other people, is considered a slightly more upscale brand. I also know like in DC, like Target was able to move in relatively easily, but like when
Mm-hmm.
Walmart was originally supposed to was trying to move in, like the city council like fought it tooth and nail and tried to like pass all these like specific regulations that would basically discriminate against it and put all these like restrictions on it and stuff like that. So there's definitely like the culture definitely views Target different than Walmart. And then when I think of like I worked in a Walmart for quite a while. I think of like, going back to that minimalist thing, like Walmarts are busier. Like there's just more stuff crammed in them. Whereas like a Target, I have one across the street from me. It does feel slightly less like just crammed with stuff. I don't know if that's like part of the aesthetic that the kind of minimalist aesthetic you're talking about, or if that's even related, but
Yeah, less stuff, fewer people.
yeah.
Just kind of a yeah, I guess a calmer atmosphere, which also, I mean, if you are, and I had looked this up and I can't remember the exact numbers, but yeah, I mean, on average for your average Target thing, you're talking about something being about like 15 to 20% more expensive at Target, I think, than you are at Walmart, right? Just because Walmart
Yeah.
has very low overhead and things are marked up at Target. So, I mean, but yeah, if you make a store more expensive, it's going to have fewer people in it,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so that was really the the temporary obsession that I got into that made me a momentary expert on this was these examples throughout history of a thing that is more expensive, coincidentally being the classier thing, and then
Hmm.
suddenly losing that status when it became less expensive, and then finding sort of, today examples of, and I don't know when minimalism will kind of lose its status as the classy thing. I don't know when Target will lose its status as the classy thing and what will cause that. But it is interesting that, and especially going back to minimalism, there's this thing that you need to have a certain amount of wealth and privilege in order to do well. Um, and all of these examples get to this idea of not defining class as, no, like refinement and elegance, but as the things that if you have them, people will know what class you belong to.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see the reverse version of this, like things that were considered unclassy that then became classy. Like we talked about lobsters earlier. Isn't it the story that lobsters used to be considered like food for peasants? Like they used to like
Yeah.
they used to feed them to prisoners and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and now it's
I think
considered
you
this.
told me that on the phone a while ago. Yeah, you had read that, and it was Yeah, it was like I mean, they were basically considered like sea insects.
Yeah, sea roaches or something like
Like, why
that.
would
So
you eat a sea roach and it's down
yeah.
there at the bottom of the sea and it's just eating all that rotten stuff that falls down? That's disgusting, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
that I also like remember reading that like whenever you see lobster in like a stew or a soup or something like that, it's because they're trying to artificially keep the price of lobsters high. Is that if they have excess lobster, rather than just letting the price go down and it no longer being a luxury
mm,
good, they keep the price up, for the actual buying of a whole lobster or a lobster tail, but they take the excess lobster and put it in things like derivative products like lobster bisque,
oh, okay.
lobster mac and cheese and stuff like that. That's like
Oh,
a
okay.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's why you never get, there's like the old joke for like servers in restaurants, like push the halibut,
yeah,
right? It's going to expire soon.
yeah,
Halibut's half off. You don't ever see that with lobster. It has to expire at the same rate as other fish.
yeah,
I
yeah.
never realized that.
I mean, it's kind of same concept with diamonds
Yeah.
that they're not actually all that rare, and so
Hmm.
there are all these things within the diamond market to keep it
Yeah.
artificially rare and stuff like that. Okay, well, I felt like I learned a few things. I feel like our clickbait title for this is Why Purple Was Once Illegal in England or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So do you have the thing in mind that you're gonna do for your next one?
Yeah. So
Okay.
should we push stop or should we actually say this like on the air so people could get teased on what's coming up?
Yeah, tease it for me in a way that like, and I'm not gonna go try to research it, but just sort of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a
I mean, the whole
hint as
point
to what.
is, yeah, the whole point is you shouldn't research anything. So I guess I could like, I could run a few things by you and see how much you know about them,
Hmm.
and that'll help me judge like whether I should do it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, yeah.
So first one is like how much do you know about like Japan's motivation to get into World War II and also like why we absolutely kick their ass left and right even before we drop the nuclear bomb on them?
I mean, I know that there was something about like an embargo. They were trying to get oil, right?
Yeah,
Like they
yeah.
didn't have enough.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's part of it. And why were we just wiping the floor with them?
I mean, I would assume it was just because of the comparative levels of like industrialization. I
Mhm.
mean, just being able to make a lot more stuff and bigger ships and stuff.
Okay, okay, interesting. Yeah. There's a lot more that has to do with the oil and their access to oil and stuff like
Mhm.
that. What about like prohibition? Do you know why all the different like because like with prohibition they didn't just pass a law, they passed like an entire amendment which is a gargantuan task. Do you know anything about like all the political factions that came together and like how like the ways that they game the system in order to be able to pass prohibition and stuff like that?
I confess that I don't, and it's literally never occurred to me how insane it is until this very moment
Yeah, it
that it
is
was
really
an
insane.
entire constitutional amendment. It wasn't just a law.
Yeah, it was an
They
amendment.
changed the fucking foundational document of the government.
Okay.
Wow, I never,
Yeah. Yeah.
huh?
Okay, so that's a super interesting. Maybe that's the one
Yeah.
I'll make. What about like the debate over whether if we could, we would eliminate all mosquitoes?
The debate over eliminating mosquitoes. I mean, is that even a possibility?
It is a possibility.
I mean, I'm not fond of being bit by mosquitoes. I mean, I guess
Okay.
my reaction would be like, don't like I mean, like, isn't that like what bats eat? Like, I don't want the bats to go
Yeah.
hungry.
Okay, that's part of the debate of biomass and like whether something
Yeah,
can replace that. Okay, that might
yeah,
be an interesting one to do.
yeah.
What about like basic hygiene practices taking so long to catch on in hospitals? Way past the time that we figured out that good hygiene in hospitals results in fewer infections and deaths and stuff like that, and why it took decades and decades before those practices took on.
You mean as far as like disinfecting things?
Yeah, yeah. Why
I
did it take so much time between when we discovered that that disinfecting would save people's lives and it took like literally decades before it actually became like a common practice.
honestly, I don't really know much about the history of like adoption of sanitation in hospitals. I mean, I know like
Okay.
organizational culture can be slow to adapt new things, but
Mhm.
that's about it. And that's
Okay.
just me sort of guessing.
Okay. And then finally, this is maybe a little bit kind of boring. Maybe just because I'm into media but like basically the history of HBO, like you think of it now as like this high culture. of like Game of Thrones and The
Yeah.
Sopranos and stuff like that, but like understanding its humble beginnings of like why the cable industry came to be, like what it was actually, what problem it was trying to solve, and basically how HBO almost got wiped off the map, but an antitrust lawsuit saved it. Does that sound interesting to you?
That sounds fascinating, and I know nothing about the history of HBO.
Okay. All right. There are a few things here I could work with.
Yeah.
I'll juggle around and I'll figure out which one I want to tackle in next
Okay.
week's episode. But this was a lot of fun. I think our experiment was pretty good
Yeah.
right off the bat. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it went well. Particularly because I hadn't run through this yet, and so I didn't know if I was going to be able to get to kind of this idea that I was trying to work towards. But I think it worked pretty well, and you didn't seem to be bored by it. So
No, it was pretty interesting.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now. And for those listening at home, we'll see you next week.
Okay.